Some of it is economic, that people feel there's some kind of benefit to being quiet about China, and, which I think is mistaken, because the Chinese government is a lot more fragmented than it used to be, and a lot of the economic actors don't care that much about the political agenda of the Communist Party. I mean, they can't thwart it openly, but a lot of the economic actors, they're acting for economic reasons, and as long as you don't flout too obviously the Communist Party propaganda, then they don't really care. Some people do it out of career reasons. Basically, China uses its visa entry policy as a kind of political control, and if you're too critical of China, you can't get into China, as I can't. I mean, they wouldn't let me in, or David Kilgore in. And so for some people, that matters, and it influences them. Some people are intimidated. I mean, the Chinese government uses its powers of exit controls, of scholarships, of control of the people there. And so a lot of the, I would say particularly the expatriate Chinese community, a lot of them are intimidated by China. And of course, I mean, you know, some people are just confused because you get all this propaganda coming out of the Chinese government about what the Falun Gong is or what our report is, and a lot of people, they don't pay that much attention, and they figure where there's smoke, there's fire, and so there's that form of opposition as well. But I would say that in some ways Australia has been quite good. First of all, there's been a lot of interest in the issue, I would say, in Australia. David Kilgore was here in 2006. This is my 5th trip in 4 years, and each time I'm coming because I'm invited, which is a lot of invitations. I've been to a lot of other countries several times as well. I mean, in the United States, I've been many more times than 5 in the last 4 years. But I would say that there is, I mean, it's not just, I mean, I wouldn't say the criterion of how well Australian is doing is how often they invite me here. There's a lot of other things going on in Australia besides that. I mentioned this unwillingness to deal with Chinese transplant professionals that are caught up in this abusive practices. The ABC's been quite good. They've had a lot of. They've been quite open to the issue, whereas I find some of the government-connected networks in other countries are not. In fact, the CBC in my own country, they actually. I mean, they admitted they got a call from the Chinese embassy about it. They had a documentary that dealt with this issue, and the Chinese embassy called, and they changed the documentary over the objections of the documentary maker because of the call from the Chinese embassy, which was disgraceful in my view, but it happened. And I don't think the ABC would do anything like that. I also think that there's been a number of very good transplant doctors in this country, including Dr. Elliott here, Dr. Chapman, Dr. Lynch. I mean, they've been some of the leaders in the global transplant profession combating this abuse. I mean, there's been other good doctors in other countries as well, but I think the medical profession here has been good on this issue. So I think that Australia's certainly done some things that, but I think there's more that could be done. I think at the political level, there hasn't been some of the leadership I'd like to see. For instance, I mean, there was this business with the State Immunity Act, which in Shu Ying, the case that went aground. There's these certificates that Alexander Downer was giving for a while, that preventing protests in front of the embassy. There's been no real attempt at extraterritorial legislation here dealing with transplant tourism, which there has been in other countries. And so I think there's room for improvement everywhere, including Australia. You know, my attitude always is, because I'm an activist, I'd rather try to impact on the future rather than predict the future, and I'd rather try to get people to move than say, you know, you're on the good side or you're on the bad side. I mean, my hope is everybody ends up on the good side, and that's my eventual aim.
name's Frances Milne, and I do quite a lot of work with asylum seekers, most of whom, of course, are Falun Gong practitioners. I'm very interested for Dr. Yu's story, and as a concerned medical student right through to obviously having migrated out of China, do you still have some sense of the groundswell within China that is using either economic issues or human rights issues as a point of protest with, we hear many rumours about the peasant groups having uprisings because their land's been confiscated for development, and other groups being very outspoken, and of course the Nobel Prize that's been given for dissidents. Where do you think the balance lies? I know David Matas has just watches too, hopefully, and I wonder where you think the balance within China itself is against the abuses of government.
What was told, and they think that they need to be do what they were told, that's all. And they only rebel when things come to, in their lives in danger, their livelihood, the last straw of their, like a house eviction, in danger, then they have to speak out.
就是说这些有些当局的做法影响到老百姓的自己的，就是他本人的切身利益。
Basically, the violation, the government is already touched this Chinese individual, their personal livelihood, so they have to stand out.
比如说现在中国到处有那个就是拆迁呢，拆老百姓的房子，那么他的房子连住的地方都没有了，所以他这个时候他就奋起反抗。再有像那个前段时间出现那个三鹿毒奶粉，三鹿毒奶粉这个婴儿吃了这奶粉之后呢，他长那个小孩就长了结石，那么这样的话就是影响到他孩子的这个生命的时候，他才站起来反抗。
Well, because as like the forced evictions happening in China widely, because they're being forced out of their house and they have no place to live, so they have to rebel. And also during the Olympic time when the melamine poisoned milk powders for the baby, and then their child's life is in danger, so they have to speak out.
但是就我在中国了解的情况呢，中国的老百姓几乎没有人喜欢共产党，没有人喜欢政府，所以就是他也希望中国好，但是因为共产党的压制呢，他一般不敢出声。那么老百姓出生的最大的一次，就是在共产党控制以后最大一次行动，就是1989年那个六四那个运动啊。因为那运动呢是学生发起的，学生发起之后呢，这个老百姓像工人呐、这些一些知识分子也参与开始反对政府腐败这个行为。
Basically, the Chinese people are just used to do what they were told by the government, and nobody would like a government because they all hope life would be easier, would be freer. I think the biggest rebel is the 1989 Tiananmen Square, the students' rebel, and that time a lot of academic, like researchers, scientists, and even workers, peasants, they all support this case.
那个时候我看到的情况就是那时候我刚毕业，刚参加工作哈，然后一到街上去，不管是白天晚上，那时候我们这个城市是到处都是人，所有的街道基本都充满了人。然后你看到街上看的时候，就看那个居民呐，你看居民在楼上的居民呐，就是像街上走的游行的人呐，那个欢呼啊，因为在中国游行呢，基本都是说在政府控制下，就是他需要你游行的时候，你才能游行。那我在中国生活这么多年，我看见唯一一次的 老百姓自发的游行就是六四那个时候。
During that period, actually, every time I only just start to work, and going to the work, I see people in the street everywhere. There is a parade, and people standing, near the street and support each other. And this is so unusual for me because, in my understanding, my life, we only hold a parade when government wants you to take part in the parade. And this is the first time ever, actually, that the Chinese people around me and everywhere in our city taking part of the parade willingly themselves.
因为在政府号召的，在政府组织的游行呢，和老百姓自发游行呢，人们那个心态啊，尤其是人那个表情，它是不一样的。当时我印象很深的，就是在那个楼上有很多人站那4楼5楼啊，然后用那个床单写上支持学生运动啊，反对那个政府腐败啊。就是你一看很吓一跳，从来没见过这种场面。就是那老百姓一看那种自发的那种感觉，就是说，原来老百姓是在逆来顺受的，原来这个一直感觉中国老百姓是这个受欺压惯了哈，也没想到老百姓也是这么发自内心的想那个获得自由。
And actually, it is shocking because that time you see people that are hanging the bed sheet, writing slogans, free and democracy, and hanging over their windows. It is really shocking because I really don't know that the Chinese actually deep in their heart really wants freedom.
Question to David. David, the Falun Gong in the wrong place at the wrong time, in that transplantation in China makes a lot of money for a lot of people in China, and people who want to go there for a kidney transplant, a liver transplant, usually wealthy people in other countries. So what's the driving force? Is it the driving force within China for people in hospitals to make money, or is the driving force to eliminate Falun Gong dissidents?
Well, I think it's a combination of events that, to a certain extent, I mean, there is this dynamic within communism of looking for an enemy, and you see that communist parties everywhere, they tend, because they don't have popular support and they're not elected, they tend to justify their hold on power by demonizing some outsider and campaigning against the outsider. And the enemy tends to shift from time to time, but there's always somebody, and so it could be to that extent the Falun Gong just happened to be the unlucky candidates for the enemy spot at the time. David Kilgore and I have only been dealing with the Falun Gong phenomenon, but Ethan Gutman, who's a reporter, a journalist in England, he's actually been doing some research in this area, and he's been doing, because he is a journalist, he's been tending to do a lot of interviewing, and he's interviewed a lot of the people that we've interviewed, but in a lot more detail about their tests and so on, and he's interviewed people in other communities, and what he's found is some of the similarities with Falun Gong, not to the same extent, in the Tibetan community and the Uyghur community, about the blood testing and organ examination and so on. And so in the work that he's doing, he's saying that there's also some, although not the same volume, victims of organ harvesting in Tibet from the Tibetan community and in Xinjiang from the Uyghur community, which to a certain extent is to me, it's the problem with human rights violations.